Hi, guys. Thanks for coming. The last talk. I'll keep it kind of shortish, I hope. This is the first time I'm talking about this, so this is a tryout. I'm giving you a vertical slice of the liquidity market, showing where the complexity lies in, and to give you a better understanding on where we are at when it comes to this space. Okay, so let's start with describing the asset layer first. So we have L1s, L2s, and L3s to settle, execute, and scale. What we're typically minting here, and let's just talk about the liquid market, is essentially ERC20s, right? On top of that, we have messaging bridges. On the one hand, it's the canonical ones, like the native bridge that's being provided by the ecosystem. But we also have third-party messaging bridges, Layer 0, Axlar, Wormhole. And this is the point where we have to introduce additional standards when it comes to messaging. Because we are in a multi-chain environment, and in this multi-chain environment, we want to be able to have asset representations on multiple chains. And for that, we need some sort of accounting, right? We need the ability to mint and burn assets to make sure we don't have double spending, we don't have a duplicate creation of value. This is what Layer 0, Axlar, and Wormhole, and so on take care of. And they all want to establish their own standards, which makes it difficult to actually navigate the space. Now we have different asset representations. Actually, each OFT is its own bridge, makes it even harder. And similar scenarios for ITS, which is Axlar, NTT, which is Wormhole, and XRC20, which is a more bridge-agnostic standard, an attempt that's being created by Connext, which is an established liquidity network, and they are really concerned about standardization. And so if you're thinking about launching your token multi-chain, take a look at XRC20 in the first place, because you have less of a vendor locked in compared to other standards. Now, we have a bunch of assets. They all represent like fungible tokens. On top of these messaging bridges, we have liquidity networks. Either the direct native ones, again, I'll get to that, or we have third-party liquidity networks. So first of all, why do we have them? Messaging bridges allow us to send arbitrary data across chains. This means we have to check for a lot of things, and that data verification becomes expensive and comes with a great overhead. So when it comes to transferring value, we want to keep it as cheap and fast as possible. So instead of just minting and burning assets every time, let's just create liquidity pools on both chains and then have fast transfers across chains by simply sending, hey, I'm sending money on chain A to the liquidity pool on chain A, and then I'm releasing the same amount of money on the destination chain, deducted by a fee, but then send the money from the liquidity pool on the destination chain. This is more efficient, in a sense that it goes faster. It's for the user, it's better. At the same time, it creates a capital efficiency problem, because now we need to have liquidity on each chain, right? Now, Layer 0 has their own one, Stargate, Axlar has their own one, Squid, and Wormhole has Portal and Mayan. So all these established AMBs, arbitrary data messaging bridges, have their own liquidity networks. On top of that, we have third-party liquidity networks again. So another player that allows us to move money, Connext, Hop, Cbridge, back then multi-chain. So there are a bunch of Synapse as one. There are all in all around 100 bridges out there. And this is just for you to understand. This is the lowest level. That's the lowest level of which assets can the user hold and trade with, and what is necessary to just understand how to navigate yourself in that multi-chain environment. On top of that, the user should understand the trust spectrum, because all these third-party bridges introduce different trust assumptions. I'm not going to go there. This is something that this could fill a whole talk. But this is something LeFi looks a lot at. It's essentially which trust assumptions are being made and where are these players on a spectrum. And that's why we integrate some bridges, and that's why we don't integrate some bridges. On top of that asset layer, we are getting to an exchange layer. Now we spoke about asset minting and moving across chains. From here on, we have the exchange layer, which is separated in two pillars. On the one pillar, we have the decentralized exchange layer, where we talk about DEXs and DEX aggregators. On the right-hand side, we see the centralized exchange layers. Here in the first place, we have centralized exchanges. We have players like market makers, OTC, and prop desks. And but I'll get to that. If you take a closer look, this again becomes very complex. We have so many different AMM designs, right? We have Uniswap v2, 3, 4. We have already heard in the last talk about concentrated versus range liquidity. We have concrete versus concentrated liquidity. We have multi-asset AMMs like a balancer. We have order book style like VX. We have stablecoin focused AMMs like Curve. Multi-chain DEXs, Catalyst launched just yesterday. So this is a multi-chain native DEX working with liquidity pools and price discovery across multiple chains. They are building on top of Wormhole, a totally new thing actually. And we constantly see new AMM innovation like Arrakis' new hot AMM or CowSwap as a coincidence of ones, which also includes like batch transactions and new ways to actually trade. And there are so many more. Like we are getting outreach every 2-3 weeks with a new AMM design that wants to make things better, and it's really hard to make all of that measurable, but I'll get to that at a later point. On the right side, RFQs, market makers, centralized exchanges, and another type of bridge, centralized exchange bridges. They do exist. LayerSwap was one of the first ones back then. Back then it meant for you as a user to generate your own API keys, create an account at LayerSwap, add your own API keys into it, and then you could bridge via centralized exchanges without having to use those exchanges. That has changed a lot. RocketX was then the first mover on creating some sort of centralized bridge, abstracting away all that API key management and moving liquidity around, and then LayerSwap copied that. So also there are alternative solutions, and it's very interesting to see what's coming. And what we are seeing now is that all of that becomes a bit more hybrid. Solver systems are coming up, intent systems are coming up. These solver systems, and right before we saw payment for order flow systems, are navigating trades across decentralized and centralized liquidity, depending on how sophisticated they are. The most established ones, to be fair, still are just on the decentralized spectrum, and we have payment for order flow that work systems that work more with market makers and prop desks, but this is merging, and on top of that, we are sitting with LeFi. With LeFi, we really try to aggregate everything. Also, be fair, again, here, right now, we are mostly focused on decentralized exchanges and decentralized liquidity across DEXs, DEX aggregators, bridges, and solvers. But via the solvers and payment for order flow systems we start aggregating, we are also getting access to centralized liquidity, which provides the best price. The question is, though, do we need all of that, right? Do we need all these different DEXs and DEX aggregators? This is the swap distribution across multiple DEXs on LeFi. So what we can see here is how are the swaps distributed across different solutions. And for example, while people mostly think about aggregators like 1inch and 0x and maybe PowerSwap still, there are players like Odas that outperform 1inch quite often, as we can see. This makes the case for aggregation just for exchanges, not even just bridges. I mean, when it comes to bridges, it's about pathfinding, like which bridge do I use to get from A to B. But when it comes to liquidity on just exchanges on one particular chain, is it worth it to aggregate DEX aggregators? Yes, it is. And now with the solver systems, it becomes even more relevant. And this is not on one chain. This is completely different on all these different chains. So on different chains, we have a different swap distribution just for DEXs. That again makes the case for aggregation. Aggregation of DEXs, DEX aggregators, and solvers. If you talk to a solver system why they outperform 1inch, then the answer is simply we have more liquidity sources than 1inch. Apparently, 1inch at some point stopped implementing new DEXs. They were just like, we can't, it doesn't scale for us, it's not worth it. But apparently it is worth it, because Odas now is growing very fast, gets lots of volume. There are other players like Propeller Hats, OTEX, Barter, and so on. Many of them mostly active on L1. But this is changing fast, and the solver market is a very interesting thing I'll also dive into. Now, we haven't spoken about that all of that takes building an aggregator or building a solver system that's sophisticated means addressing, understanding, implementing, maintaining, and monitoring hundreds of APIs. At least one RPC per chain. You want to have fail safety, so make it 2. You need guess estimations. They actually differ. It's totally different on one chain where they take into account the overall payload size versus on others where they don't. We have fee markets, so I have a DEX fee, I have a bridge fee, I have the gas fee, there are multiple chains, transaction simulations become complex, and I need that, plus relayer networks to actually combine more complex transactions. So if I want to go from one asset A to any other asset X on chain B, I often need to swap, bridge, and swap. For the user, that's horrible, right? So with LeFi, for example, we make sure that we aggregate all of that and we connect all of this on an on-chain transaction rail. So we can swap, bridge, and swap within one signature with our one transaction. And that's also necessary for the solvers. But transaction simulations kind of become a hellhole because there's gas slippage. Just that alone is annoying. And it becomes hard to make that fail safety. On top of that, we end up with lots of fragmented data. Each bridging transaction is not one transaction, it's two. It's one transaction on the source chain, it's one on the destination chain. So you have an additional analytics overhead, your BI, your internal business intelligence. It gets messy really quickly, and Dune is also not of a great help because Dune doesn't support these more complex multi-chain transactions in a great way. Then you have to combine that data with, for example, Flipside. You need additional data sources. Then you have different asset representations: USDC, USDCA, USDCE, wrapped USDC in different forms. This is just USDC. We have the same situation with DAI, USDT, now PiUSD, and other stablecoin alternatives are coming. It is a very messy situation we are in. And then getting back to the APIs, who does all the status code mapping? Do you think we are getting great API responses? Certainly not. To debug all of that is kind of hard. So status code and error code mapping, just in order to provide a good experience for developers and end users, is really tough. Yeah, fragmented data across the board. And now we just spoke about EVM, right? I don't need to tell you that non-EVM like exponentially increases the complexity of this problem. LeFi is now 60 people almost. We are 60 people and we're still just aggregating. And I could double the team tomorrow and would still be busy. It's just so much work. And we don't see a close future, near future, where we are getting out of that mess because there are some people interested in standardization, but the best funded companies are not. They want to have a vendor login. And that's what they are pitching their VCs, to get huge valuations and raise a lot of money. Everyone wants to become the standard, so no one is interested in adopting the standard, right? We just saw Uniswap and Across trying to come up with a standard for cross-chain settlement, so that intents that are being fulfilled by UniX could be settled by Across. We'll see how many people are actually going to start to adopt that standard. And we still haven't talked about fail safety. If an RPC is not available, you need a second alternative for everything. We haven't spoken about high availability. If you want to serve a Robinhood, someone with millions of users, you need high availability because they otherwise want redundancy. And well, you kind of, as a solver or aggregator, you want to provide redundancy, right? But then what is your redundancy? So it gets difficult for someone that has to be compliant and needs to be available all the time. And then we have global availability. So then suddenly you realize that your API gets really slow in certain regions of the world because just to realize, oh, actually 0x has their API only deployed in Europe and in the US, and in Singapore it's not, and then latency comes into play. So for global availability, you need another level of analytics just to understand, like, where are my counterparts, where are my third parties actually deployed, how reliable are they, and is it up to date? And we haven't started optimizing yet, right? Because then you want to optimize for API latency, but also for gas costs and all of that. Monitoring analytics, rate limits and API costs, MEV protection, customer support. It is a very messy situation we are in. We are talking about mass adoption, we're talking about chain abstraction, but we're so far away from that is the reality. We're so far away from mass adoption. LeFi tries to tackle that. I don't want to talk too much about LeFi. We said 3 years ago, someone needs to aggregate that and abstract it away. And 3 years later, we have the narrative chain abstraction. Thank you. Now we can talk about intents. Yeah, intents. So let's historically. So historically, we sent the user to the exchange, and it became complex because you have different exchange on different chains, and price discovery is a thing, and the user doesn't know where does he get the best price. Next thing we did is, well, we sent the user to an aggregator, first to 1inch, later to someone like Jumper Exchange, because we get you the aggregation of the aggregators. With Jumper Exchange, you get 1inch, 0x, PowerSwap, tons of DEXs. You also get the bridges, so you don't have to think at all anymore. But it doesn't scale, as we have learned, right? All I told you about is all that mess we're in. Our company with 60 people, and as I told you, I could double the company, and still we would be too busy. The model doesn't scale. So what are we going to do? Well, why don't we build not just one aggregator, but lots of specialized ones, so we can distribute the work. So now we're sending users to marketplaces, and these marketplaces collect lots of aggregators, solvers. Solvers are mostly aggregators, right? And they can solve for these different things. But it's complicated, because you have a chicken egg problem. A marketplace, essentially, always comes with the question, who comes first? Example, Amazon. Amazon in the beginning wanted to be a marketplace for books. It needed the merchants and it needed the consumers. It went to the merchants, hey, sell your books on my place. And the merchants were like, well, do you have users? No, we'll get your users later. No, we're not interested. So they went to the users, hey, we want to sell you all the books and we aggregate all the books for you. And they were like, can't see them. Yeah, you need to come at the same time. Right? This is a chicken and egg problem. It's difficult. And the one way to make this happen is essentially to make a one-sided market, a multi-sided market one-sided. A typical way to do this is to proxy one side. So you market yourself as a marketplace, but you just fake the other side until you have enough of the other side. So in Amazon's case, Amazon started selling books themselves on their own marketplace platform until they got enough consumers, and then it became attractive to the merchants. And with intent system, it's the same. The intent system goes to the solver, hey, please implement our API, and the solver's like, well, do you have order flow? And intent is like, probably not. We have seen so many intent systems over the past 2 years, Brink, Essential, whatever, you name it, where it's just tough for them to get the order flow. And then they are going to the business. They go to Robinhood, and they're like, Robinhood, hey, could you implement this maybe? And they're like, well, how good are your prices? How competitive are you? They're like, well, yeah, we are in touch with a few solvers. We're going to launch them soon. So it's difficult. So what we're going to see is lots of intent systems bootstrapping their own solver system, running into the same problem DeFi has right now. So how will this play out? Distribution is king. This is how it will play out. The systems that will win are those that already have the distribution. It's 1inch with 1inch Fusion. It's Uniswap with UniX. It's maybe us. We have a decent amount of distribution, but we are not building an intent system yet. We think it's a bit too early. But distribution is king, and we're going to see this play out here very strongly. But it will introduce a bunch of problems for new ecosystems, because now ecosystems need to be implemented by solvers, and these solvers are going to be completely overwhelmed. They have no interest in implementing a solver system that is an ecosystem that doesn't have volume yet. So again, a chicken egg problem between solver and ecosystem. So this problem bubbles up because the solver market is highly competitive on fees. It's low margin because it's all auctions, right? UniX is auctionizing that intent across these solvers. So it's really hard to make money here. On top of that, it's not a venture case. And because it's not a venture case, the solver system cannot take risks. It's not interested in implementing Mode or Mantle yet. Maybe if they believe in the hype, but that's like not based on data. That's like based on faith. And that's not a good business strategy. You do that once or twice, but there are a bunch of L2s that won't see adoption because of that scenario. And we might see a mode via specialization. But again, specialization means chicken egg. Because let's say I'm a solver, I'm saying like, I'm going to focus on perp trading. And instead of aggregating DEXs, I'm going to aggregate GMX. for example, and other solutions, right? Then it also means they need an intent system that brings them intents in the first place, supporting this kind of thing. And so can they actually specialize? Difficult. Then you might argue, well, we're going to have someone that focuses on new upcoming L2s and skips trying to compete with existing established L2s. We see this strategy with Connex right now. Connex is a very established bridge, and they have had a hard time shipping, so they got crushed by bridges like Stargate and so on, even though they have been doing an amazing job. It's an amazing team. But at the same time now, they need to find a different strategy. What they are doing now is essentially focusing on new and upcoming L2s. Smart. Will it play out well? We don't know. 30 ecosystems that do not enough volume, will that be enough for another financing round? We will see. On the intent side, chicken and egg. Highly competitive for distribution, 1-inch, Uniswap, all of that, M1 swimming at the top of distribution, bloodbath. Fucking bloodbath. It's like we see that nowadays. We are in the same deal flow with 1-inch and Uniswap, and I'm just sharing here a little bit, right? Like it is incredibly tough to win deals, and there are incentives being thrown around across different personas and champions across the deal flow. It's incredibly tough. You have to be very, very aggressive. They require market efficiency to be competitive. So if Uniswap manages to ship faster and actually win more solvers fast enough, they're going to be much more competitive than the 1-inch Fusion, for example. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I'm out of time, unfortunately. I think one potential mode is exclusive solving. So they get solvers that are very, very good and exclusively solve for them. That again, chicken and egg requires distribution. Otherwise, the solver is not interested. And then, specialization, modularity can be another one. Socket used to be an aggregator, or still is. I don't know. They do a lot, but they trying to be a modular system. But yeah, it's difficult, and chicken and egg across the board. So we will see how that plays out. That's us. What are we? Hard to say. We're all of that. It's all the DeFi liquidity out of one API is the simplest one, I guess. Thanks. If you want to talk about any of this, feel free to ping me. We are talking to so many solutions every week. Have a very good overview. And thanks for coming to the last talk.